Fall, 1975. A school gym in Memphis buzzed with nervous chatter. Talent show night. Backstage, a 15-year-old boy clutched his guitar, bracing for another round of whispers. He'd been mocked for weeks over his voice. In the back row, unnoticed, a man in dark glasses leaned forward. It was Elvis Presley. Stories like this remind us why moments of kindness are never forgotten. Stick around to see how one night and one act from the king would silence the bullies forever. The gym smelled of floor polish and popcorn. But behind the curtain, all Tommy could smell was fear. The folding chairs squeaked under restless. Parents, overhead, the hum of buzzing fluorescent lights pressed down like a weight. It was fall, 1975, and the annual school talent show had the small-town gym packed wall to wall. Backstage, Tommy Miller, 15, stood with his back to the wall, guitar clutched tight. He kept his eyes on the scuffed toes of his sneakers, avoiding the stares from a knot of varsity boys leaning against the bleachers. Their whispers sliced through the curtain. Hope he doesn't crack like last time. Should have brought earplugs. He tried to tune them out, but his fingers betrayed him. Shaking so badly, the guitar pick clicked against the strings. The curtain shifted. Mr. Reddick, the school janitor, leaned in just far enough for Tommy to see him. The man had been sweeping floors here for 20 years, and he gave the same nod he'd given every nervous kid who'd stood in this spot. "You got this, son," he said, voice low, steady. Tommy wanted to believe him. Out front, the MC's voice carried over the murmur of the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our next performer." And that's when Tommy noticed the man, 3 rows from the back, wearing a crisp white jacket that caught the overhead light, sat someone he'd never seen before. Dark glasses, jet black hair, shoulders squared like he owned the room. The man leaned forward, elbows on his knees, watching the stage with quiet focus. Tommy blinked. The face was familiar, too familiar. It couldn't be. Witnesses later swore it was Elvis Presley home between tour dates, slipping into the local talent show unannounced. But right then, Tommy didn't know for sure. All he knew was that whoever it was, they weren't laughing. They weren't whispering. The MC cleared his throat. Next up, Tommy Miller. The applause was polite but thin. Tommy's stomach lurched as the curtain jerked open. The gym lights hit him like a wave. He stepped out, guitar strap digging into his shoulder. The sound of his sneakers loud against the wooden floor. Every face turned toward him. He took 2 steps to the mic, but the sight of those boys front row now, grinning, stopped him cold. His mouth went dry. His fingers locked somewhere near the back. The man in the white jacket shifted, one leg crossing over the other, head tilted like he was waiting for something. Tommy swallowed hard. He tried to take a breath, but the air in the gym felt thick. His guitar strap suddenly felt too tight, and in that frozen moment, one thought burned in his mind. Don't mess this up. Not again. He stepped to the mic. The room was so quiet he could hear the faint creak of the basketball backboard above him. Then, nothing. He couldn't make his fingers move. Somewhere in the dark, a chair squeaked. The man in the back leaned forward even more. Tommy's foot tapped once against the floor. He closed his eyes, and froze. The first note should have rung out clean. Instead, it wavered like a voice in the cold. Tommy's pick scraped across the strings, a shaky G-chord buzzing with too much pressure. Somewhere near the bleachers, a muffled chuckle slipped out. Then another. The gym's fluorescent lights hummed overhead, a constant low drone that made the silence between notes feel heavier. A single cough echoed from the back row. From where he sat, the man in the white jacket stayed still. Dark glasses, unreadable face. A cluster of teens in the far corner leaned in toward each other. One cupped his hands around his mouth. Flat. Already, he stage whispered. The other snorted. Tommy's shoulders tensed. He tried to steady his breathing. He'd practiced this song in his bedroom 100 times. The opening verse was muscle memory, but his voice betrayed him, breaking. On the second line, that's when the laughter started. Not loud, not yet, but enough to make the air feel sharp. Enough to make his ears burn. Elvis, if it was Elvis, shifted forward in his seat. Witnesses later recalled seeing him turn to a nearby teacher, his voice low but firm. "What's the boy's name?" "Tommy Miller," she whispered back. Tommy caught the movement in the corner of his eye. For a heartbeat, he looked away from the bullies and locked on the still figure in the back, head tilted, elbows resting on knees. Watching like every note mattered. It was a lifeline until the chant began. Off key, off key. The words rose like smoke from the front row. Two boys slapped the backs of their chairs in rhythm. Tommy's throat tightened. He missed a chord. The wrong note rang out harsh and metallic, and the chant grew louder. He wanted to drop his pick, run off stage, and never look back. But the man in the back row didn't move, didn't flinch. Instead, he slowly uncrossed his legs, planted. His boots on the floor, Tommy noticed, and so did everyone else. One of the bullies twisted in his seat to see what was happening. The chant stumbled, lost its rhythm. The man stood, boots scuffed against the gym floor, the sound impossibly loud in the sudden hush. Step, step, step. Conversations died. The squeak of a folding chair echoed like a gunshot. Someone in the crowd gasped, and the bully's smirks faltered. Tommy's hands hovered over the strings. He didn't dare move. The boots kept coming, slow, steady, cutting a path through the center aisle, and for the first time that night, every set of eyes in the room turned away from Tommy. They were watching the man in the white jacket. The boots hit the polished gym floor like a metronome. No one dared interrupt. Step, step, step. Conversations died mid-breath. A ripple of movement passed through the crowd as people leaned or craned their necks to see. Tommy froze mid-verse. His hand locked on the fretboard. His voice hung in the air and then vanished into the hush. Witnesses recall the moment the overhead light caught the sunglasses, that flash of reflected white under the gym's buzzing fluorescence. Gasps. Someone whispered, "That's him." The man in the white jacket kept walking, slow and steady, cutting straight down the center aisle. No smile, no wave, just focus. The crowd instinctively parted, folding chairs squeaking as they shifted out of his path. A teacher near the stage pressed a hand over her mouth. Tommy's pulse pounded, so hard he could feel it in his grip on the guitar. 3 steps from the stage, the man stopped. For a long moment, he looked up at Tommy, head slightly tilted, like he was measuring him. Then, he turned, speaking to 3 teenagers, clutching borrowed instruments, the school's makeshift house band. "You boys know this one." They nodded nervously. One adjusted his snare drum strap, another tightened a loose guitar string. Without another word, the man reached for the mic stand. The crowd inhaled as one. He lowered the stand until it was level with Tommy's mouth. The metallic squeak of the adjustment echoed in the gym. Tommy's eyes darted between the mic and the man's face. Up close, there was no mistaking him. The jet black hair, the sideburns, the unmistakable presence. It was Elvis Presley. And yet, in that moment, it wasn't the king of rock and roll looking at him. It was just a man who'd seen enough to know when a kid needed someone in his corner. Elvis leaned in, voiced low but certain. "Sing it with me, son." Gasps rolled through the bleachers. Even the bullies sat frozen, their earlier smirks gone. Tommy swallowed, his throat dry. The guitar strap bit into his shoulder as he shifted his weight. In the back row, a parent's camera clicked. Somewhere near the entrance, the janitor stopped, sweeping entirely. The band waited, instruments ready, eyes locked on Elvis for a cue. For a second, nothing happened. The tension in the room was so thick you could hear the faint rustle of the American flag above the scoreboard. Then Elvis tapped his boot once against the gym floor. The drummer gave a soft count. 1, 2, 3. Tommy tightened his grip on the pick. Every face in the gym leaned forward. The first chord was about to hit. The first chord rang out like a shot, clean, confident, nothing like the trembling start from before. Elvis's voice slid in on the second beat, low and warm, wrapping around Tommy's thin melody like a safety net. The gym froze. Conversations, whispers, even the restless shuffling of feet stopped. All eyes were locked on the stage. Tommy's voice steadied almost instantly. His fingers found the frets without searching. Elvis gave a small nod with each line, urging him forward. They traded verses. Elvis never took over. He let Tommy lead. He'd step in only for harmony, his tone deepening the sound, filling the gym like a velvet wave. In the corner, the bullies sat stone still, their arms slack against their knees. The chant from earlier was gone, replaced by an unblinking stare. The gym's lights reflected off Elvis's white jacket, sending faint glimmers across the polished floor. Dust motes drifted in the spotlight beam, visible in the still air. Halfway through the song, Elvis reached into his pocket and pulled out a silk scarf, pale blue with faint silver threading. He draped it over Tommy's neck. Mid-verse, never. Breaking rhythm, the crowd erupted, applause echoing off the rafters. Tommy's voice swelled with the sound. By the bridge, he was singing louder than he ever had, the fear gone from his face. Elvis leaned toward him during a guitar break. "Take the solo," he murmured. Tommy blinked, stunned, but then his fingers moved on instinct. The notes rang true, carrying over the silent crowd. When the final verse came, they sang it together. Elvis stepped slightly behind, letting Tommy's voice hit the last high note alone. The chord faded. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the gym exploded. Chairs scraped. Hands clapped so hard the sound seemed to bounce off the walls. A teacher near the front wiped her eyes with a folded program. Parents stood, whistling and cheering. Tommy grinned for the first time all night. His chest rose and fell fast, his knuckles white on the guitar neck. Elvis put an arm round his shoulder and guided him toward the edge of the stage, waving once to the crowd. Then, without warning, Elvis leaned down and whispered something into Tommy's ear. His hand lingered on the boy's shoulder for a moment before he stepped back. No one else heard what he said. Not the teachers, not the band, not even the kids in the front row. But whatever it was, it made Tommy's eyes widen and his smile falter just slightly, like the weight of the words had landed deep in the bleachers. The bullies sat quietly, avoiding eye contact with anyone. The gym was still roaring when Elvis gave a small wave to the band, signaling the set was over. Tommy stood rooted in place, scarf around his neck, Elvis's words still in his ears. He didn't know it yet, but those words would follow him for the rest of his life. Tommy barely noticed the applause anymore. All he could hear was the low rumble of Elvis's voice in his head. "Don't ever let them steal your song." The words had been quiet, but they landed like an anchor. He stood there, scarf still warm against his neck, trying to process them. While the gym erupted around him, Elvis straightened and turned toward the crowd. "You all just heard a voice worth listening to," he said into the mic. His tone wasn't flashy. It was matter-of-fact, almost protective. The effect was instant. The laughter from earlier was gone. The faces that had smirked and whispered were now flushed. Eyes lowered from the back row. The janitor smiled, arms folded across his chest. Tommy's heart pounded. It was the first time in weeks he wasn't wishing to disappear. A teacher near the stage stepped forward, holding out a hand to Elvis. "Would you say a few words to the school?" she asked. Elvis shook his head. "I think they've heard enough for tonight." With that, he handed the mic back to the stand, gave Tommy's shoulder one last squeeze, and stepped away. The crowd parted again as he walked toward the side exit. The sound of his boots on the wooden floor was softer now, but every step still seemed to echo. By the time the gym doors swung shut, Tommy was alone at the front of the stage, scarf still in place, guitar strap digging into his shoulder. The principal climbed onto the stage, beaming. "Well," he said, "I think we just witnessed something special." The rest of the show went on, but it felt like the air had changed. Even when the final act finished, people lingered in the aisles, talking in hushed tones about what they'd just seen. Tommy avoided the bullies as he packed up his guitar. They didn't try to speak to him that night. He replayed Elvis's words over and over. Lying in bed with the scarf folded neatly on his nightstand, he didn't know exactly why those words mattered so much, but they did. And then, a week later, the school secretary called him out of math class. Her expression was unreadable as she led him to the office. On the counter sat a large package, brown paper tied with twine. His name written in black marker. The return address read simply, Graceland. His hands shook as he reached for it. The secretary smiled faintly. "Go ahead, open it." Inside the box, beneath layers of tissue paper, something gleamed. The sight of it made his breath catch. Under the last sheet of tissue paper, sunlight caught the polished curve of a guitar. It wasn't just any guitar. The body was a deep sunburst finish, fading from rich amber to midnight at the edges. The chrome tuners gleamed. A faint scent of wood oil drifted up as Tommy lifted it from the box, the weight solid and balanced in his hands. Tucked beneath the strings was an envelope, heavy cardstock, the kind that felt important. He slid a finger under the flap and pulled out a single folded sheet of Graceland stationery. In neat blue ink script, it read, "You'll always have a seat in the front row. E." Tommy stared at the note, his throat tightening. His math teacher's voice, muffled through the office door, was calling students back to class. But in that moment, everything outside the office disappeared. The secretary, still leaning on the counter, broke the silence. "I think that's one of those things you keep forever," she said softly. Word spread through the school before lunch. By third period, the principal had called an impromptu assembly in the gym. Students filed in, whispering. Even the bullies sat toward the front, their usual swagger muted. The hum of the lights overhead was the same as that night, but the mood was different, quieter, expectant. Tommy walked to the stage with the guitar in hand. scarf still draped round his neck. He didn't speak at first, just stood there, letting the murmurs fade. The principal stepped forward. "Last week, you all saw something unforgettable," he began. "Tonight, it's clear it meant just as much to the man who gave us that moment." He gestured to Tommy. Tommy held up the guitar for the crowd to see. Gasps and scattered applause filled the air. "Came in the mail," Tommy said, voice steady. "From Elvis." It wasn't a boast. It was a statement of fact, but the effect rippled through the room. A girl in the back clapped her hands over her mouth. One of the bullies shifted in his seat, staring at the floor. Tommy didn't play a song that day. He didn't need to. Just holding the guitar was enough to tell the story. Some say that was the turning point, that the bullies stopped bothering him entirely, that kids who had never spoken to him before started sitting with him at lunch. Others remember it differently, that Tommy changed too, that he walked taller, spoke louder, looked people in the eye. Years later, former classmates would tell the story at reunions, their voices lowering when they reached the part about Elvis walking down the aisle. Tommy kept the guitar for the rest of his life, played it at coffee shops, at church picnics, at the weddings of friends. The scarf stayed in its own drawer, the note pressed flat in a picture frame above his bed. And while the world would go on to remember Elvis for stadiums, gold records, and chart-topping hits in that small Memphis school, they remembered something else. The night he stopped everything to stand beside a boy with a guitar. Because sometimes it isn't the roar of the crowd that changes you. It's the voice that tells you not to give up when you're sure you already have. Tommy went on to become a respected local musician and a mentor to young singers. Many of them would later say he gave them the same advice Elvis had given him: don't let anyone steal your song. If this story moved you, share it with someone who believes one moment of kindness can change a life. And tell me in the comments, what's the one act you'll never forget someone doing for you?